Force, Monday, January 27th. So, hello everybody. And so just to do a little recap, because Lauren wasn't here the last time.
Thank you.
Pretty much what we did last time is we went over kind of, to kind of analyze the information that people had. So we went over the P-bid, kind of the why we're here, and then kind of talked a little bit about the challenges that people have come up with. The issue of just the structural operating deficit that the Emeryville now has, both short-term and long-term, the need for a long-term bus yard, and then within how it's funded, not just the structural deficit issue, but the fact that issues of faculty have come out, both within those that pay into the P-bid, whether it's the right engineers report now in terms of use between the different land uses, as well as issues of potential equity between those that are paying into the P-bid or are part of the P-bid and those that are not part of the P-bid or don't have conditions of approval to participate financially into the system. That was kind of it. And I can also get you one. And there was also, we didn't discuss it, but for, again, to kind of bring everyone up to speed, I passed out copies of the PowerPoint that was done, and I think it was July. That was the Emeryville in the study session, but it kind of went through a lot of that background in depth and how the PIBID was founded and how the Emeryville was founded and how it went from the Emeryville founded really a city initiative inviting the business community to be a partner to the PIBID. So
I was there.
yeah, I think you were there too. So anyway, that was what we kind of did that day. So the next steps was to look a little bit more into where we are today. So these all say drafts, most of them. This was kind of very new work, just getting a list, for example, of development projects that were projected out to about 2020 and what we think of the estimated construction schedules of the draft, because they're still kind of working a little bit. So that is where we are, so that's why it says draft. And also, for example, I put in, based on the P-bid today, what those projects would generate in terms of revenue. I put it in the period of time that I was given that construction ended. And we need to tweak it a little bit because that may not be when the money comes in, just because of the timing. So that's kind of why it's a draft now. But I think for kind of the discussion today, to get a sense of what are the projects, where are the projects, and a sense of what they would generate under the current P-bid would be a good place to start. So, first thing on the agenda is an update on the last TMA meeting, which Betsy was there, and I think Kim was there, and of course Jeff was there. So please chime in if I forgot anything. One of the things that was discussed was that there was the TMA was going to be doing a route analysis, and as part of that would probably be reviewing their current budget for 2014 and also doing a bit of a projection so we can get a better sense of kind of what is their estimated need for revenue to meet current ridership capacity. Ridership continues to grow. I think it was at 1.6 for last year, and we already know that it's going to probably be higher this year. So for example, the San Francisco Children's Medical Center has just come in. There's been some tenants that have moved in, and there's also some projects that will be coming online. So that was one of the things that was discussed. That was that, and I think that was going to be expected to be done by the February meeting.
I think that's the hope.
That's the hope. But
And if I could just clarify, so route analysis, I mean, the mission is just to try to review how to best serve the existing stops effectively. It's not really looking at driving radically different places, but can you efficiently and equitably also, I mean, you don't want one part of the route taking 30 minutes and another 3, kind of want to you want to maximize the service for everyone, but it was intended, importantly, just to be what we're already serving. How do we do that, or can we do that better The answer may be, it's already optimal, but that's the point.
And I would be, I said, these just got done, but I would think this would be helpful for the TA to kind of project out a few years, kind of looking at what might be needed to serve some of these
And you all asked us to look to the end of the P-bid, so the budgeting work will do that.
And so that was one of the things. And the other main topic was that the TMA did agree to serve the stop near the Watergate condominiums through the life of the existing financial mechanism, the PBID. And I've requested that the city change the turnaround at that stop. And so that request has been made, and the city is starting with looking at what the cost, what is necessary to do that, what the cost would be, and kind of we'll go from there, I think. So that, I think, Betsy or Jeff or Ken, I think that was pretty much the main topics. Okay. So with that, we can switch to budget. So when I'm passing out, I think I'll pass out everything at once. That's probably the best thing. I need for myself. So what I'm passing out is, the piece in yellow is the current budget of the Emeryville as passed, as voted upon by the TMA board. That would have been back in July. And that was the budget that was used for the basis of the fiscal year 13-14 PBID assessment district levy. And right now, as they're working budget, there have been a few changes since that budget, which I will talk about when we get everything passed out. But essentially, if you look at I said, one thing about a staff level committee, we're going to be a little bit deluged with information because usually if you're an advisory committee, you've already kind of done all that kind of intermediate work and we're presenting you with recommendations. But being on a staff level meeting, a staff level task force means that you get to kind of go through that process with us. So if you look at the piece of paper with the yellow, that is the budget as they adopted it. It says 1 out of 2, the first out of the second. The second page is really some of their projecting, depending on their internal staff work, so I left that off. This is really the summary. So if you look at 2014, which is the current service year, so one thing to understand about the Emeryville is that the way it was done is that the fiscal year 2013-14 assessment levy pays for the service calendar year of 2014.
Oh, that's how it works.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the last levy assessment is fiscal year 15-16. But that would fund to the end of 2016. And that was kind of done a little bit on purpose. So, if, for example, it didn't get restored, then you had a few months to either think of what it would be or to wind down without kind of stopping service within a day's time. And there were so that was.
So you're saying the levies are basically come from 2 years for the current budget?
Well, the fiscal year for government is from
Yes,
July 1st
yeah.
to June 30th. But the fiscal year for the Emeryville is January 1st to December
I get
31st.
that.
So the way the money comes from the county and the desire to kind of have a little bit more logical sense for you had to wind down. So the last levy is 2015-16, and that pays for service through December 2016. So the current service year is 2014, and it's paid with the levy that was adopted by council for 13-14. So if you look at 2014, what was done was at the bottom, a 2.5% increase with an estimated shortfall of just under $260,000. And on that basis, the TMA had asked the city for $250,000 this year in order to meet ridership capacity. Now, the deficit in the budget is based upon a service expansion. So if you look at some of the assumptions and notes, so it's not so much that if they didn't get that money, they would be cutting back service, it's just if they didn't get that money, there would be some likelihood that they couldn't expand service to meet the demand that is
Yeah, call it
already there.
expanding service. I mean, I think of service as how many buses run at what frequency, and if more people ride them, you need more buses. So you're carrying more people. You're not making them more frequent necessarily. You're not covering more places. So it's sort
To
of,
maintain what
a
has been the
static
traditional
ridership.
service level.
I'd say
Maybe is a better way of putting it.
static ridership, which has not been our experience, right? So.
Yeah.
To enhance the service, to maintain what has been the traditional service levels, which have not necessarily been met lately because of the added ridership in terms, and also just in construction and other things like that too. So, when we went back, so this was done in July. So, on the last council meeting, January 21st, is when the city actually authorized what the compensation would be for the TMA for this year. And that's kind of based upon when the money starts coming in from the county. And so we kind of took a slight look at that budget again, and we think that it may be more than $120,000 difference. But again, they're going to be looking at their budget probably in February. But we think that it may not be quite the same. There were some assumptions, for example, where the rebate went for the erroneous charge for parking garages. We paid that out of the PBID fund, and they had put that into their budget assumptions, and they put it at a higher rate than actually we ended up needing to rebate. So there's some of those tweaks that we think lowers the spend maybe about $100,000. But again, they're going to be redoing their budget, and we'll get a better number.
Yeah, like in the last meeting, we said that we've added some service to cover the expected growth of people specifically coming from UCSF, which is going to cost, we anticipate it costing $48,000 this year. So that, these are teeny little things that, these are rounding errors when
Right.
you get down to those levels of digits, right?
No, exactly. So, yeah, exactly. When you're talking about a 2.7, $2.8 million budget, $100,000 here, $100,000 there. Particularly when you're talking real money, but no, a service, an operation like this, you can't really fine tune it necessarily that much. Fuel might go up or fuel might go down too. So, but this just to give you a sense of, that there is kind of a structural deficit built into the budget in order to maintain service quality that exists now with the additional ridership. Then we get into looking at what is coming in the future. And I'm thinking that maybe the discussion, everything at the end, as I said, please ask clarifying questions and have a little discussion, but I think sometimes these issues overlap. So to kind of maybe have more substantive discussion at the end. So the next map, and I really want to thank Helen and Charlie and Diane Keenan for doing a lot of the basic work for this, are the major development projects that we're looking at anticipating over the next few years. You can see, when you see these separate sheets, I've divided them into under construction, or there's a master sheet that goes with that. You can kind of see the different categories here, under construction and approved and future. and kind of in general when we're expecting construction. And then I thought it might be useful just to see a map of where that would be. So we can get a sense that there's going to be certain routes potentially impacted fairly quickly. We have under projects that we would expect to happen this year or next year, the marketplace redevelopment is under construction, ambassador housing is under construction, the Parkside projects are under construction, and Bakery Loss and Ocean Avenue, of course, are not that many units. But you can see that detail in the small, on this chart that says under construction. And so if you look at that chart, what you would see is, I said, the green, this is under construction, is when staff believes that construction will be complete. And then what I did is I went back and based upon either the residential unit numbers or their square footage, and these do not include parking garages, I looked at what under the current PBID structure would be generating revenue from those projects. And so then for 14 and 15, I assumed the maximum traditional increase that has been levied, which is 5%. But for example, for 13, 14, it was 2.5%. But I just assumed the 5% that had been historically the maximum that the TMA board has recommended. So you can get a sense that for 13, 14, there's a fair amount of projects with that are expected to be done this year, but not a whole lot of revenue. And again, given that, given when these are constructed, they may not be on the property rolls until next year. But that's kind of the next level of getting a little bit more fine-tuned. And if these are drafts, if we were really looking at being able to fine-tune the renewal of the PBID or fine-tuning any other funding mechanism, we would do that level of research to be a lot more specific or much more accurate. But since I don't know when they're going to do on rolls, I said I'll just put them where we expect construction to be done. And then we see ECCL on the under construction list as well, though I guess it's fair to say under demolition. And then that expectation that would come online in 15, 16. So you see that by the end of the PBID, in terms of what's under construction now, for that 2016 service year, we're expecting about $95,000 of additional revenue. But that's not till the last year. My guess is that most of these projects will be seen for the 14-15 year, just in terms of.
I think, okay, so what's interesting about this is in 2015-16, you have the transit center. Is it supposed to be built out by 15-16 when I'm looking at this?
What we have is planning submittals.
Right.
Right, and the planning submittals, what I have now is that would be done at the end of calendar year, would be
Roughly half of the commercial,
Right.
you know, the same as the warehouse industrial.
yeah, you're right.
Unless you have if you have a
Yeah.
huge unit, you're doing, that would be a lower per square foot and vice versa, but that's probably what it.
I mean, it was a question that I asked in the study session last year, but I'm not sure, and I don't know that we have the data that we need to answer this question. You are certainly in a better place to answer it than I, but the difference, I'm not sure that commercial and retail makes sense to, office and retail makes sense to the same.
Street and the Marriott Courtyard, so kind of hard to say is that retail or hotel, but you can say that's not office,
Right.
right? So they're doing some passenger counts now to try to give that kind of information. I mean, there's certainly an opportunity to rejigger the whole ratio in a new PBID if that's the funding mechanism, right? And so that's
About, of just what the ridership would be of these projects, just kind of not scientifically, but, if there's, 2 employees per 1,000 square feet, you know, for an office building, and, you know, and we have, so now look at it the other way. That if we have been going up about 100,000 riders per year, except for during the recession, and just using the per passenger cost that I think was brought up at the meeting, which was it like $1.80? Right, $1.80. And so just looking at it that way, which is a very simple way of looking at it, every year you need $180,000 more money, right? And that's, that's not a scientific way of looking at it, but after trying to figure out what each project was generating and not getting too far with that, it seemed, well, that gives you a sense of what we're talking about.
The other way we think about it is, I mean, it's certainly the city's been progressive in trying to, on a policy level, reduce car dependency and being walkable and bikeable and, all those things, basically encouraging people not to drive as much. So even if the city didn't grow at all, and the city's successful at all in doing that,
There's
there's a greater demand, yeah. And, the parking ratios in the new general plan being lower, all that stuff is encouraging increased transit use. I would imagine most people at the table support that, or you wouldn't be sitting here, although some of our members, I know, are not sure they like transit. But, that's the challenge, is just to keep serving the existing buildings if they increase in ridership, and then we have the 30% growth over the last 18 months, sort of shocking, big bump.
Right, and right now, I guess office occupancy is about 85%, which is, pretty healthy, but there were times in Emeryville that it was quite a bit greater than that, and, and we do know there's a couple projects now that are, not, that don't have the occupancy that would be projected when, they're kind of up and running for good, and so, again, 200 more, 200 more employees at a location. If 10% of them use the Emeryville, that's 20 more people trying to get into that bus. So, I think, I was just looking at kind of, if you just simply said 100,000 more riders per year, and that really doesn't take in effect what these projects are really going to generate. This is a growing, this is a popular service. Okay, so that's really, I said, I will double check the figures. I think I may have transposed something. I was trying to make the chart ready. But I said, it gives you a sense of, we're not going to, through the existing mechanism.
Order of magnitude.
Order of magnitude, we're not going to generate the kind of revenue to keep the service level, kind of where I think many people would like it to be. Either you start discouraging people if you drop service levels, and certainly the city has embraced sustainability in terms of alternative transportation as a key policy component. On the other hand, there certainly are the mass transit systems around us where there's not money, service is reduced, and that's always a possibility, is to have a certain size, and that's all that can be done. So, in addition to this, the other major financial need is a long-term bus ride. Now, I would say that is something that is, I won't say on the back burner, but the good news is that the current bus yard, I think the TMA has till about, was it 2018 or so?
Well, it's all subject to 6-month cancel,
Exactly.
so I sort of figure we have it for 6 months.
Depends how you look at it.
Any day you ask, we have it 6 months more,
Right,
until
exactly.
we get the letter that says that's started ticking, so.
Now, the fact that LBA is the owner of that property is now the vice president of the
Yeah, but
TMA.
that doesn't matter, let's be honest.
I know.
They have a huge property they're trying to redevelop, and our parcel is one they've paid money for. It's not gonna remain a bus parking lot, for which we have a decent deal, because we will agree to this short-term situation that's convenient for them. So that's just unsustainable long-term.
So that is, I was in the category of, I agree with Jeff that having 6 months essentially and you have to be gone is not a very stable situation.
Your hands.
Right, it's not a good thing. And so there have been essentially 3 locations at this point that were identified, with council having one preferable one. And they were under the I-580 overpass, kind of on the border between Emeryville and Oakland. It's been used for vehicle storage for a while, and quite frankly, it's not going to be developed for, it's not able to be developed. It's on Caltrans right-of-way. They don't allow permanent structures. No one wants to have a building under an underpass anyway. And while it may not be the highest, the best use, it would be a use that would at least secure that area and make it, fairly safe. Lights and some activity. So right now, that's the preferred spot, but that is in Oakland. That would have to be approved by Oakland in order to be there. And of course, there would be improvements. So Caltrans did say that they would be interested in long-term use for that site.
And Karen, just for a second, we do have a lot of new residents that are living down there,
Yes.
right? So there's the new ambassador housing, and then there's also the California hotel that's going through its renovation. So just want to put that out there, that, I think that there would be folks who maybe would not be supportive of
Absolutely.
placing a bus yard in that
Right next to where
location.
they're living, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's quite true. And which brings us to the second place, which was also 580, but near kind of the Target store, near off of Mandela, right on, again, the Emeryville Oakland border in Oakland.
And Caltrans owns that too, or is it?
Caltrans owns that
railroad?
too. Caltrans was very willing to let us have that site. We actually kind of started down that path, but WOCA, the West Oakland neighborhood, essentially said that for us to, I guess, not oppose that site, it would require the mitigation of sending a shuttle down Mandela to the West Oakland BART station.
Yeah.
And that was just, that was just not possible. And there didn't seem, I would say different parts of Oakland's government and community had different points of view about that. But the bottom line was that ended up being what was said needed to be done to make a yes.
That may not still be the case,
We are hoping that,
because I.
They're
go to those
inviting
meetings.
Oakland residents, businesses and residents, but we're hoping.
That may not still be the case. There's such a problem on Caltrans property with blight and dumping and homeless and you name it, that doing something with Caltrans property as opposed to nothing is certainly worth looking at for them.
and that parcel does have the advantage that there really aren't residents right adjacent to that site. They're a little bit.
There's residents living on it, but.
But it's not, the residential neighborhood is.
But there were 2 political issues. I met with Oakland and,
Yes.
there was for those living there, we think, that's a classic, you're dumping your ugly uses on Oakland, and we've had that for a long time. That was sort of the quality of life issue. And then the other issue, a little different, was the Economic Development Department, which no longer exists. This was the redevelopment folk. Imagine this is like an auto mall that would bring huge sales taxes into Oakland. And,
That's not gonna happen.
well, I didn't think it was gonna happen then, and they said it's imminent, and it still hasn't happened. But that's sort of a long-term economic development question, a little different than the use question.
And coming to Jeff's point, and to your point, I think that there are some folks in Oakland who see the value of, because that has been really a headache,
Right.
that space there.
More than that.
The value
Yeah.
of having something there, but there are some, it's a huge organization, there are some politically who still are believing it's going to be an auto mall.
Well, and
So-
also, you may have to spend a little bit more, you need to do more than just put up chain link and lights, but, could be.
Yeah, that was sort of, we had plans, and,
Right.
we had to deal with Caltrans for the little triangular parcel between the highway and Target, so out from under the shadow of the highway. And Oakland said, well, we gotta have that for auto mall. So we said, we'll go under the highway.
Yep.
And then they said, we need that also for our auto mall. Like, we're gonna have, there's a whole bunch of sites. Caltrans also has sites on, south of the freeway, out in the daylight.
Yep.
One that's paved and was, a Bay Bridge, had trailers on it, you may remember, it was on the east side of Mandela. So we thought there was enough real estate for this use to be there even with an auto mall.
And there isn't enough business, even though there's a lot more business activity on Mandela and also on Adeline, that there's not enough to generate enough revenue to fund the shuttle to go.
We pitched that this would be, security activity, the buses would be going down there, so as soon as there was an evolution of people a little further down, the route doesn't go there today.
It makes
right?
sense.
So you're already
Yeah.
sticking a finger out that way,
Yeah.
but that wasn't persuasive at the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's I don't know when that conversation was, but.
It was a while back.
Yeah, I had that conversation a week ago, so it's a little different now than it was then.
Yeah, because at the time, it was, no, you need to run the bus down Mandela.
Well, I think they love that, but they
Well-
want it for nothing.
Well, they
Well,
said
well,
that,
that was
but
the point.
I'm not even sure that would have gotten people over the quality of use issue, right?
Right. Right,
Like, I don't know. So, it never sort of was even entertained far enough to get into a public
Right.
process with it.
right.
We submitted an application to the city, and the city said, no, auto mall. So it didn't even get discussed. So.
We're trying to get-
Businesses are failing on Broadway.
Well, and they, that's funny, you can see it from the freeway, you just can't get there from the freeway, so I'm not sure it would be an
Yeah.
ideal auto mall.
I agree, I was like, it's kind
Yeah.
of like the Target in
People wanna
Albany,
bike
it's like
into
you
the
can see it, you
Yes.
can't figure out how to get there. So anyway, and then the only other site that had been identified that was kind of not, was Lacoste, and that was not, Lacoste Street to block, to essentially vacate that.
That's
This was just us trying to
not
find
ideal
any
for
site.
many.
For many, many reasons, even for the buses themselves, it was not a great site. This was kind of staff
It's down
looking
here.
anywhere in the city. And
So
the idea was
to take-
essentially
to block it
vacate
off.
the end of that, block off the street, but that wasn't
Yeah.
a great site, but quite frankly, the limitations are that to the extent that you can't be in the city limits or very near the city limits, you're increasing your operational cost. Because then your buses, like they're in Richmond or something like that, or East Oakland,
Yeah.
out by the Coliseum, then.
We've looked at that,
Yeah.
and it's just much more expensive.
Well, then they're sitting in traffic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
they're
you-
sitting in traffic
You
too.
pay, you're paying the bus drivers for it, there's a security premium because you get tagged and vandalized and stuff, so.
So, now, right now, the bus yard is included in the draft CIP plan that staff will be, I guess all the different committees will get a chance to weigh in, and then there'll be, I think, one or two community meetings, and the council will be weighing in.
And that's for this site here, or
It's
just
n-
any
it's
site?
For any site. So
Okay.
again, it was a placeholder. It's kind of, I think right now, kind of put out in the outer years only because there's not a project, to actually put the money in. And in the past, the council had said that they were willing to consider about $1 million. But, again, that was some time ago. It was when there was still some redevelopment left. And even though this was going to be general capital money because it was maybe out of city limits, that's a project that's going to be part of a hopper in the CIP. And we'll have to compete with other projects.
That's,
And
that's general fund stuff.
that's general fund stuff. Now, of course, one of the things that city attorney said, like Biddle, at the last meeting, is that with the change to PBID law, there is the possibility of doing a bond with some of those funds. That was an option the last time the PBID was established. And so there could be some capital money being raised through that mechanism as well.
Can that be used for
leasing a bus yard though?
Excuse me?
Can that money be used for leasing a bus yard though?
You know, I'm not a bond counsel, but I do know that sometimes long-term leases, like 30 or 40-year leases, can be considered the same
said
as
so.
purchase.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the city attorney said so.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good
But
possibility.
it would need to be researched, like,
Yeah.
you know, specifically.
So that-
But it's at least, you know,
Not-
there is a potential tool out there.
It's
that
not
can
a-
exist
clearly a
before.
no, right?
Not your 6-month lease. That's not gonna work.
Right, but yeah, but there is that, you know, that again would be something that would take some time to. So I just wanted to bring that up. And then the last thing, which I've heard now, is, that came up to be discussed, is, we were asked about a transit occupancy tax. So we've not really, for those, for the benefit of Lauren, we really haven't gone, really talked in depth about the different funding options. We were really kind of laying out the groundwork and kind of what are the limitations and or possibilities under the changes in PBID law. Certainly there's some sense among some that there may need to be a supplemental funding option, but you know, the PBID kind of in many ways works very well, particularly if you can address some of the issues that have been brought up around equity. And given the fact that it seems that to have the kind of service that people seem to desire, it's going to take additional funding, and it's unlikely that people are going to spend more under the PBID. Maybe they'll be willing to spend about the same, particularly if we address some of how it's done.
Karen, would you please define for me what transient occupancy taxes are?
Yeah.
Essentially, it's hotel tax. People also call, I probably should have said that, it's also called hotel tax. So whenever you go to a hotel, you get your bill,
Yeah.
there's like it's a surcharge.
Okay, yeah,
So yeah, so this is the hotel
okay,
tax.
this is the hotel.
And so, so for Alameda County, and then I threw in San Francisco as being kind of, you know, in the same market as us. These are what the percentage of the bill is. So Emeryville's at 12%, and if you see our neighbor Berkeley is at 12%, Oakland and San Francisco are at 14%. And the lowest is the Dublin and Hayward and Livermore, and Pleasanton, which are not what I would call in the core. They're a little bit out there.
You're saying in effect they're less competitive than the ones you cited.
Yeah.
I think in terms of attracting visitors, they are less competitive.
So the Claremont and Piedmont has none, I guess. just
There
that
is
one.
no hotel in Piedmont, Claremont in Berkeley.
I think they, yeah.
Yeah,
No, Claremont Hotel's in Oakland.
in Oakland.
Oh,
Only it's right on the border.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Piedmont's,
There's no hotel in
Yes,
Piedmont.
Right. I think they have like
Oh, it
two,
isn't.
they have like
Yeah.
two business licenses.
Yeah.
And just, I think some of the relevance to this conversation, hotel taxes come into the general fund.
Yes.
They're unrestricted, can be used for anything. A couple of these cities have little restricted add-ons, but that's not really relevant. But in general, they come in unrestricted, and it's just a 50%, plus one vote threshold, so.
San Francisco funds some arts out of it and so forth,
Yeah.
yeah. They have
Yeah,
some-
and they have little surcharges on it, like Oakland's has a 3%, 3% of that 14% is restricted, but in general it's.
Yeah, sometimes they
It's
restrict, sometimes they
yeah.
do chamber of commerce or
Yeah.
visitor centers out of this money too.
Yeah.
They do that kind of thing out of this money, or some of it.
So
But just,
the good news is it's there, the bad news is that it's CIP and then or general fund and you're fighting with everything else.
it would go, it would be added revenue to the general fund that the council could,
That they could spend on
that
anything.
could decide to, yeah.
Or you could, I mean, you could,
You
you
could
could,
say restricted,
that's right.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Anything above this level is gonna fund transit or the Emery.
So what's a percent
That has a
worth
lot
today?
of cut both ways thing, you
What's-
know.
It
It
does,
does.
and
And
just,
I think something like the Emeryville round, it would, if the city understands that funding is needed, would have pretty high priority. because of all the people who live here.
But the thing from year to year, right, when you get
Yeah.
the tax, even if you're not spending all of it, perhaps you're building up a capital fund, or right, if you have a restricted, use to it. And it wouldn't be subject, so you would have this small carve out that wouldn't be subject to the whims of whoever is elected, right? People look at that as a kind of insurance, that it would have a dedicated funding stream, even if it's not a lot, over time. And I also think, like, if you're gonna go to the ballot box, you wanna tell people where this money is going,
Well, that's true.
right? So that if we ask people to increase this tax, and we said it was going to go toward improvements or expansion of, or just the maintenance of the Emery-go-round, it's a very popular service.
That's true.
Right, that's a winner.
Yeah.
The problem is it locks you in for long term. I know it's not a ton of money, but, you know, it's always a trade-off.
And
What's
if you
the
want
percent
to,
more?
really quick, I just want, on that
Yeah.
note before we leave it, I believe if you legally restrict it like that, you would have to pass a two-thirds.
2/3, yeah.
So
Any
just-
rough and ready estimate of how much money we're talking about here? Let's say it was imposed right now, how much would it generate?
You have any numbers?
We're estimating about 5 million this year.
Total?
So 12% generates 5 million.
I mean, it's been rising in the last year, so
So
last
2%
year
of
was
that would
4.8,
be-
we're estimating about 5 million this year.
2%.
And that's with pretty good occupancy rates.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's another issue,
It's
that
been-
when it's things like sales tax
So
and
less,
TOT.
80,000, 90,000, something like that?
In 2010, it was
800,000?
3.3.
Yeah.
So it does fluctuate.
It does fluctuate.
That's right, this is not
I
an
don't think
absolutely reliable source of funding at all.
So a percent's worth 450 grand. or
Right,
something like that.
right, yeah.
450 this year.
Yeah, so that's why I said
No,
800.
it's okay,
yeah,
it's
for
not chump change.
2%.
No, it's not, yeah.
Well, when the budget's 2.8, that's not chump change at all.
No, it is.
Right.
No, it's substantial.
We all need to remind ourselves, this is a fluctuating source of funding.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was thinking about.
And Emeryville is popular enough, and also with Oakland and San Francisco being at 14, you don't think that that would decrease hotel, right?
My personal opinion.
I mean, Hayward's not gonna get away with it, you know, doubling
It
their.
is not it's a tax, I mean, it's a lot like, you know, what's the word for it, there's a technical term, which is basically like an invisible
Mhm.
tax for a lot of people, right? Because, you know, you go, I don't know what your own personal experience is, but I certainly don't book a hotel room.
And
based on
judge the, right,
yeah.
right.
But when you get your bill though.
Like, whoa, where you could see, and I have heard some folks, industry folks, who will say it can discourage, let's say, some big corporate
Conventions or whatever, yeah.
right? But again, if you're looking at our closest neighbors here.
That's what I mean, it's so.
We're awfully convenient to San Francisco.
Yeah, well, that's it.
Well, you become-
Yeah, we've got the every-go-round.
And our base rate
Huge
is
benefit to
Yeah.
the location.
Collectively, I can see us all eyeing this.
Yeah.
But just remember that it's a fluctuating fund.
It is.
It require going to the ballot.
Yeah.
These are things we need to keep in mind.
Well, it certainly doesn't pay for the system as the system
No.
runs today,
That's
right?
right.
It could make a material
It's a
impact
source-
even
it's
in
a
a
source
crummy
of
year.
revenue. Yeah, it's a source of revenue.
And it very well could be that we're, looking at several
Yeah,
revenue streams.
it's not just one, it
Yeah,
doesn't
have
make
to be
sense.
one.
I think our instincts, if I read the group correctly, is looking for a mixed solution, a variety of ways of coming at solving the problem.
Yeah, yeah,
So this is certainly one of them.
yeah.
Well, the political problem that the Emery-go-round has, because we've thought a lot about it, and you all are thinking about it too, is just a lot of people who are saying, I was okay with it when I paid a lot less, and I still am willing to pay something. Most people, even Francis is saying that. Now, I don't know if that he means it, but he says it, and I think more of the people in his group feel there's some value. They just think the amount they're paying exceeds the value. So I think, politically, to say we're trying to pump other money into it
Right.
to certainly, if not lower your cost, restrict its growth into the future is pretty meaningful. I mean, I think that's what these people are at heart seeking, you know?
And in this context, I know we're all eyeing Alameda County, and we're all watching that financial plan group that's operating, expenditure plan group that's operating. We're all tracking Ruth Atkinson's service on that committee regarding whether funding will be shifted from the tech category over to shuttle financing. And we're all wondering whether that down the road is a source for funding coming to Emeryville.
They did vote to, the commission
Yes,
did
so
vote.
we all know that's cooking out there, or at least most of us who've been listening to Ken's, or looking at Ken's videos and so forth, know that that's cooking. But that's not something we can absolutely rely on.
We also don't have a lot of power in terms of Alameda County as a whole, because
Say
we're so
that
tiny.
again.
So,
But I think you need to change that.
well, I agree, but, you know,
And I
I mean,
think one of the things that we need to do is really wave the flag and say, look, Emeryville is doing the right thing here.
right,
We are so in step with one Bay Area. You
Yeah.
know, it's like, look at our land use, look at what we're doing, look at the success of our shuttle.
No, I
But,
completely
hey,
agree.
we need help here.
Right.
So what,
But
we can make-
But we are different from every other city in Alameda County. We are not like them at all because of our size and our small geographic footprint. And so a lot of things that work here do not work there and vice versa.
But if we could make a better case for
absolutely.
heavier funding from Alameda County, commensurate with their general transportation needs and their commitment, so they say, to shuttle services and supporting them. And that's one of the solutions that this task force should be thinking about systematically.
Just needs to,
And
it's
that
a
the
lot
city
of
should be
noise.
thinking
We
about
gotta make more
And that the
noise.
transit, that our local Emery-Around folks should be thinking about.
But I also have a question, and my question is from, you know, early last year when some of this stuff started, you know, sort of bubbling to the forefront with the, you know, meetings and with the planning session and et cetera, the question is, what does the Emery-Go-Round want to be? And everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, there's different people have different views on what the Emery-Go-Round wants to be. This is a way over a generalization, so nobody attack me, but you know, I think if you look at the greater residential population of Emeryville, it's regional transit, and it's great that it's free, lucky us. If you look at the business community, the business community is like, hey, we've been helping this portion of it, we've been helping fund this, you know, shuttle system so that we can get our workers in and out and whatever. And if you look at the retail, they're like, we're willing to pitch in because it gets our shoppers here and we're delighted about that. The problem is that each of those different views, it requires different kinds of service and different, I think that in the overall scheme of things, what it costs is sort of, at this point, kind of beside the point. It's kind of like, you know, if you're looking at it from a residential perspective, saying, okay, it's our regional transit, you want it to go everywhere and stop everywhere, and you want it to do it every 5 minutes, right? If you're looking at it from a business perspective, you want it to run primarily when you need your workers to and from work. If you're looking at it from a retail perspective, you want it, you know, mostly during heavy shopping hours, or more during heavy shopping hours. So those are all very different models, and the question is, what does the Emery-Go-Round want to be? And I'm not sure we've completely answered that question yet.
And I brought this up at the last meeting, and I think that's.
Sorry, I wasn't here.
No, but I'm glad you're saying this, because I think that's the fundamental problem that we need to solve, basically, is what is our policy here? And this goes back to the book that I was reading that the guy from AC Transit recommended. Really the fundamentals is like, what kind of coverage do we want to have? Do we prioritize coverage or ridership? What's acceptable levels of service? How far should people be willing to walk to a bus stop? And you know, if we put a bus stop here, but it adds 10 minutes to the ride, is that the right thing to do? And those are all policy questions that I think, and like you say, really, we need to figure out the policy first. What do we want this thing to be doing? And then look at what it costs to do that, and then we make adjustments. Well, trade off here, we can't do this, we can't afford to do this.
Yeah.
What's our
Because
priority?
historically, what it was designed to be is not, I think, what people want it to be today.
Mhm.
And historically is how we've, done the funding and done the service and all of that. And we've, obviously you guys have tweaked that over the years, but I think they're it's really needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I would like to
There's
interject.
also a really just practical day-to-day situation, which is who's actually writing the Emery go-round that fits in. It's not the residents. The residents are probably the third of the business, the shoppers, and the residents. The residents are the smallest number, right? We may have a big
Oh, I don't
voice
know. I
because we
don't know.
depend on
Yeah,
it,
that's-
but we are not the heavy writers.
Well,
I don't
the
know.
earliest indications suggest residential is pretty high, but let's not get
No,
into
I
that.
don't think so.
Well,
Yeah.
they're taking
Yeah.
surveys, so I'm not trying to make that the issue. I would say, I agree with you with one caveat, which is, we've yet to say there's a source of funds that can pay for the whole thing as it exists today. So the policy matters, except that if you're wanting to run roughly the size it is today, I mean, unless you're gonna say the policy will be to make it half the size, because we don't have the money, you have to be informed with who is willing to pay for it or has paid for it. So the PBID, right now, the routes are to some degree constructed because that's where the density of development was that would pay for it. I mean, that happens to be also where most of the riders are. And the city's really tiny, so it's not like your AC Transit is huge moves. I mean, they're very tiny moves, right? So the kind of tiny moves that can exist are the go across the border to service a grocery store that a lot of people wanted, and to be able to create opportunities to connect to transit there. Would you touch over to Oakland to try to encourage their Broadway shuttle or some other thing to come on? I mean, those are, but I don't know, because if you could come up with a policy that there's nobody there to pay for it, right?
Well, I think,
So,
so here's part of the other problem. I think this is a fundamental problem also, is that there's the Emeryville, and then there's basic transportation in Emeryville. And the Emeryville certainly is a huge component to that. I don't think it should be the only component. And I think we really need to engage AC Transit more, and they should be part of the solution. What part, I don't know, but I do think that they should be part of the solution. And I think there's great opportunities to basically provide greatly improved service to Emeryville by engaging AC Transit and maybe saying, well, maybe Emeryville does less, AC Transit does more, and take advantage of things like the Easy Pass program and stuff like that. I think it's just, we have to look at the big picture as transportation, and certainly we're here for the Emeryville, but in doing that, we have to look at the big picture.
But AC Transit also, it goes along San Pablo, it goes along Hollis, it goes along Christie. So I mean, it actually has a fairly large presence. It's just changed its presence over the years.
This is one of the things that really came up in right now there's the
And
EVOT study.
40th.
The
There are a
EVOT study
number of
going
buses
on.
on 40th.
The Emeryville Berkeley Open
Right.
Transit study.
Right.
And one of the things that, has come out of that, at least in my conversations with AC Transit, is, AC Transit runs a lot of buses through Emeryville, but do they really serve Emeryville? Do they really take people where they need to go? And I don't think they do. They certainly don't meet my needs, although they're really close. For example, the F bus, it's a great direct route to San Francisco, but it just meanders around so much and it's so unreliable that it's not really usable. If we could tweak that a little bit by changing the route a little bit, make it go 2 blocks beyond where it goes so it picks up the core of the city where we're doing our development, we could get the ridership that would support that I think would maintain that.
I
So
think
it
it's
wouldn't
so
be-
difficult with AC Transit. I mean, I used to take the F because it was a nice kind of loop around Cal. And then what happened is that they got more shuttles to service Cal. And so that the F just starts making this wide perimeter around the university and not going down Bancroft anymore. I mean, the the problem is I think the issue of local control, and with the Emery go-around, we have that. AC Transit is harder to influence for all kinds of reasons. I wish we had more leverage, because they certainly have a lot of land use going on in the middle of our city. But I think that's really difficult to do over the long term. But I want to work on that. That's not to say that we shouldn't look at it. We need to have a plan for that as well. But I think within the next couple of years, especially to try and get them to provide better service when we have so many people who depend on the Emery go-round is going to be hard. I think we have to do both at the same time.
I don't think it's as hard as we're making it, to be honest with you. And believe me, my past experience with AC Transit has been very different. I'm very encouraged by what I heard through the EBOTS stuff. Very encouraged. That it's I really got a sense of AC Transit wants to help us if we can tell them how we want to be helped. I've never sensed that before.
One of the problems is self-determination that the mayor's mentioning, which is, you have local control, but then when you take it, it makes it easy for the other people to ignore you.
Yes.
But if the flip side is cut it off totally and scream how horrible it is, right?
That doesn't work either.
It would be great if there was a way to, you have it, but you could apply pressure to improve it. And I don't know, that's more of a political strategy than anything else.
But you're right, we have to have better politics around getting what we need.
But that is outside the scope of what, I mean, I think Jeff's point is completely apropos. It shouldn't be either or, it should be both. But we're here to do the Emery go-round, and Jeff's point is accurate. I still think it's important for us to have a conversation, or at least a consensus about what the policy is, because we're having trouble funding what we have now. And from my hearing, and you sit there and listen to everybody, so, I really hear a lot of emphasis in, we want the Emery go-round to be our regional transit, because, we're not being well served by AC Transit. Fine, we can, tweak that, but we can't fix it. And
I believe we can.
Okay, whatever, we still need to work out how we're gonna pay for the Emery go-round.
How can we come up with a plan that, we like the Emery go-round, right? And we want it to continue. I would love for other people to pay for as much of it as possible. I don't know that anyone would object to that.
Right.
It's the reliability and the risk in that. So how do you maximize other people's money without the risk of
giving up the control.
giving up, or finding,
Or
giving
finding
up-
out one year they're not giving it to you.
which is the control.
Right.
You just don't have,
Right.
oh, they cut it this year, right?
Right.
I mean,
Well, I think.
And I think that's the problem with the money from Alameda County. They don't turn money over to business groups.
Well,
Do you
we're
wanna
gonna have
speak
to
to
go
that?
to another meeting, but my understanding is that what has happened is that, the good news is that the money for shuttles is in a bigger pot than it was previously.
Yes.
So I think the initial pot was about 70 million, and I think now it's not pot of 300 million. But it's competitive, right? And so there's no guarantee that you'll get any of it. And this is just to say that it's money available, but it's not money that you can, kind of put in the bank. And two, it's a long way of knowing what the guidelines for that funding would be. So for example, it's not dedicated for shuttle, it's in a pot for other types of programs as well.
Yes.
And so we don't know if they're gonna do a call for projects, which is a call for shuttle projects, or if it's a call for any of these 3 or 4 different kinds of projects, of which shuttle is one. So given that, you can't really say either how much money will be available or just what the trade-offs are going to be, because if it's a shuttle-only call, we're probably gonna do pretty well. If it's a shuttle plus A, B, and C, then for one, geographic factors come into play, because that money is always looked at in terms of every region getting their fair share. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't get money, but again, we don't know what those guidelines will be. And and what the specific call for projects will be. So I think it's money that we will get some for something. My guess is that, I'm just guessing, that the best bet for that money, in my opinion, is rolling stock. You know,
Maybe bus yard.
maybe bus yard.
Somehow non-operating, non-continuing.
But I think, given the competitive nature of that, and we don't know how the call is, unless it's like a pilot program, you know, like if it was a pilot program to West
West
Oakland.
But then you have to.
But then you're in the
You have to
Broadway
s-
shuttle period situation,
and you have
which
to
you got
step
it
up
for
with
3
the funds.
years
They're
or
not
however
gonna-
many
they're
years.
not
and-
gonna renew it.
Right.
That's right.
So I personally think that that pot is probably the best for capital.
And also Kevin Layden has said in the past that generally when ACTC funds things that they want ridership participation in paying for it, which is what's happening with the 8-to-go, where they're wanting, when they renewed the funding this year, they said they wanted the riders to pay something. So it's $1
But
each
that,
way,
you know,
which is a minimal amount of money, but then you're getting into this whole thing of collecting money.
Yeah, well, there is a private contribution with the Emeryville. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not all, right?
Yeah.
If they gave us a grant, you'd say, well, they've got
Everyone's
millions.
putting money into
Yeah.
it, yeah.
But I would love a scenario where you could continue the PBID, but convince people like John or like the Emeryville property owners that there's real concerted effort to get other people's money. Because I know the risk, I'm gonna speak for you, is if you get it set up with a continuing fund, everyone says, well, I don't have to worry about that, I'm gonna spend time worrying about the things that no one else is worrying about, right? Because you only have so much political capital, so many hours in the day. But if you could think, you could tell people you're committing to the PBID, because there's this really big effort to bring other money in so that you don't feel like you're spiraling out of control and no one else is sharing, right?
I just want to say, I totally support the PBID.
I
was like,
again, I think everyone would love it to be funded by other people's money. I would.
Yeah, exactly.
Back to the county. We all know the county's a hard sell. And we all know that even with this new categorization of those funds, we're in competition with many other projects. We know that probably it would favor capital investment of some type. But for heaven's sakes, let's not stop constantly lobbying the county.
Yeah.
Work through Ruth on that
Absolutely.
expenditure plan committee and keep at it. Because that is potentially a very important source of funding.
It was interesting from what I understand of the conversation, that there were kind of some allies in Oakland. And I
Yes.
was trying to think about why that would be.
Why that would be.
And I think
And
partly
even-
it's because of they have their own shuttles that need to be funded, but also when you think about it, is the Emery-go-round is taking cars off of their roads
They're
as
re-
well.
Yes, that's
You
right.
know, it's taking, you know,
And I heard some talk in that group about West Berkeley being interested in connecting to or
North
being a,
Berkeley.
I'm sorry, is it North?
It was West Oakland and North Berkeley.
Ah, okay.
I think that's what it was, that's my
But in
recollection.
any case, Berkeley as well is.
West
looking
Berkeley
at-
would love it, since we
Yeah.
pay a lot of money for a shuttle there as well.
That's what I think.
Yeah, there's a
but if you think
political
of 5,000
challenge.
riders per day, that are, you know, the rides per day, that most of them are not just internal to Emeryville. And so, you know, these are people that could be coming, you know, through Oakland and through Berkeley to
That's
get here.
To get here, yeah.
So,
Well, I also think that it's really important to think, like, the last thing I personally want is for AC Transit or something like it to run the Emeryville route. Like, I think that would be.
I agree.
So-
Someone right there.
So, the thing is that it makes sense from a global perspective for AC Transit to do a really good job providing trunk service.
Yes.
And something like the Emery-go-round, the Broadway shuttle, whatever, to
Feature.
provide last mile and, you know, sort of the local
Yeah,
part of it.
some of our
So-
passenger count information preliminary suggested there's a lot of pickups at 40th and San Pablo, which suggests it's an AC Transit
Right.
connection,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
Oh,
it is.
yeah, there
are a
You'll
lot
see
of
the
buses there.
lines.
Yeah, so that, I mean, it's a first and last mile, because Emeryville's only a mile big, it can't be much further, right? So-
Perfect, perfect.
There are a number of AC Transit buses that pull in there, because sometimes I take the Emery-go-round to the senior center, and when I leave, sometimes I go to other stops, but oftentimes I will leave at 40th and San Pablo, and I see all the buses, and they pull up and they get out and they transfer, or they go the other way. They, you know,
Yeah.
might be on the Emery-go-round, and they, you know,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
can go the
downtown.
other way,
Yeah.
to AC Transit.
I want to mention one other thing about Alameda County, which is they have developed a whole very strong philosophy in the past 3 or 4 years in trying to do area-wide projects that serve more than one city. And so, you know, if we're applying for funds in any way, if we can show that we're serving areas outside of Emeryville, that's very significant.
Well, I
we're
like
going to
that
work,
idea. I
So,
mean,
you know,
It would be
That's
great,
good.
so
That's good.
Emery-Go-Round reaches out and
Hard to
touches the
pitch.
privately funded West Berkeley shuttle now. And there's the Broadway shuttle, which may be at risk because it wasn't
There's no
funded
money.
by, it was all gift outside, but, you know, they're still there, and if they could start reaching towards us and we reach towards them, and then you had a request to ACTC for, you know, fund these 3 shuttles that work together in a way, maybe
Or the
that's
streetcar.
more.
Jeff,
Well, I mean, that's the way to build up to that, right?
Jeff, that's a very
It is,
good thing.
it is, it's
That's just
exactly-
right
Because I've
on
heard
what you're
people that they
saying.
take the Emeryville around to MacArthur Bar, and then they take it's not the Kaiser shuttle,
I take the
it is
Kaiser
the Kaiser shuttle, right from
There
MacArthur.
there are a number
To
of
go get
hospital
downtown.
shuttles
Yeah,
that.
yeah, to downtown.
Yeah, you can take them, yeah, anywhere. And so you can take, if you're going over to Piedmont Avenue to go shopping, take the Kaiser shuttle.
Last mile.
Yeah,
shop
that's
is
what
free.
they want. They want that type of thing. It's
A lot of
called
town.
mobility management.
well, it's not free. Maybe free to you.
Right.
It's not free.
It's free to the rider to
Free
encourage
to the
the
rider,
rider.
To the
that's right,
rider.
without a fare.
Yeah.
I mean,
Because
I'm
the
just-
fares and transfers add to people's.
Oh, no, I'm
resistance
with
to
you.
it. Yeah.
I'm totally with you, but it's, you know.
No, someone is paying for it, I
It's not
fully
free.
realize
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so, next steps.
Well, are there things we can take off the table? We always, you know, to narrow our, you want us to advise you so you can advise council.
Council is taking the sales tax off the table, so that's
So,
off.
sales tax, we don't need to consider.
No.
That is helpful.
Can we, are we sure now that the problem of the turnaround at Watergate is going to be solved? Or
That'll be
don't we-
brought before council.
Okay, so that's off the table.
Well, we don't, it's on the council's table.
It's on our plate
I
right now.
understand.
Yeah.
But we know we're all agreed that we want that turnaround efficient and enhancing the
We want to make
Emery-Go-Round
sure that
service.
Emery-Go-Round can do what
Absolutely.
it needs to do.
I would say that there's certainly agreement that servicing that stop is important.
Okay.
So do we want to say, let's look at increasing the hotel tax?
Why don't, for the next time, since it is 10:15, and I said 10:30, but I was actually hoping to get people out at 10, but I was like, okay, maybe I should say 10 and then if, I'd rather say 10:30 and get people out early than say 10 and, people are still dribbling out.
Appreciate that.
Is to for next time, kind of come back with a possibility, and, it seems that most of us, at least at the table, or say us, I don't vote, but, well, actually it's staff level, but it seems that there is some thought that the PBID in some form really is the best way of continuing to fund the show. It may not be the only funding, but there's not another major funding source. Now, if that's, that's something to discuss the next time, is if that in fact is the right one. Because people have talked about things like parcel taxes and other things like that as being supplanting it. So I think that might be the first kind of step.
Can you do a parcel tax as an additional, or does it have to be either or? Does the PBID not work legally if you go to a parcel tax?
Well, I think that's a question for the city attorney, but I think that there had been, at some point, some discussion among some on whether or not to renew the PBID at all, and instead do some kind of alternative funding.
Well, you do need let's just talk, I know we want to finish up, but let's 2 minutes on this. There are people who are really unhappy with it, right? And there is an issue, they have votes, and so I think it would be great if we could find a way to say, this mechanism has worked, most people who are paying it are satisfied, everyone wants to look at equity, but there's some commitments that weren't at the table before. It's not just all of you as the only ones again. If that would be a commitment to pursue a hotel tax or a parcel, any sort of idea that you're saying there's others than your money brought to it,
Why don't we all, among other things for next time, start trying to think about what a mixed package of
Yeah.
funding
Yeah.
for the operation might look like.
That's what I was
It's a
trying to
menu.
go at, because I think that one is, there is that fundamental question about whether or not the PBID is going to exist at all. I don't think anyone is assuming at this point, just looking at the structural deficit, that that if you're going to maintain the service, it's going to be only the PBID. Because to me, I think it's pretty clear, given what is being said among those that are paying now, is that, it's going to be a sell for some to pay what they're paying now. They're certainly not going to pay the additional amount that we're looking at with these, the gap. And so there's a gap funding that's going to be needed no matter what.
I think there's an argument to be made, like, if the PBID ends up being the vast majority of the funding for the Emery go-round, the Emery go-round will change. I mean, it has to.
Yeah, if there aren't additional funds.
Right.
Something's
gotta give.
will erode.
Right, and I don't, right, and I'm hearing from this group, and I think that that's been really the assumption, even very early on at the council level, that some other type of funding is also going to be needed. So I don't think we're
That
saying.
it can't be the
so-
PBID alone.
So I think that maybe the next time.
It can't be the business alone.
Right, I think that's one thing that's helpful, would be to have that discussion on whether, to kind of have the discussion about whether or not there's an assumption that there is going to be the likelihood of a PBID renewal being the foundation, so to speak, of the service. And, because I think that that's something that some people would question. And then from there, kind of, you can get into what the mix of packaging would be. Or if there are people at this table who feel strong that the PBID is not at all the way we should be going, then there's a different kind of discussion, because then you're talking about a 2.7, 3 point, you're talking about a magnitude that, quite frankly, I don't know, based upon just the discussions we've had to date, what other source of funding are you gonna raise that kind of money with?
We can't have though just a funding discussion, because that's where everything got cockeyed to begin with. We've touched quite a lot today on who we're actually serving and what the purpose is of why we like the Emery ground service as it is. I think we need to define that very clearly, that if we want to keep the Emery ground as a service, and if we want to keep it with pretty much the same kind of management we have right now, why we want to do that? Why we want to keep it, why we don't want it to become AC Transit or the city to run it or whatever.
That's something the
And
council
we need
did
to
also
define
address
that
that.
very, very clearly, so then our funding discussion comes out of that.
I think that is something also that was a parameter of some of the funding options, is that the council did say that they were not interested in the city operating the show. And so Mike Bill, our city attorney, did say that may have some parameters around funding. However, certainly if you had the kind of, if you had the kind of funding that, one advantage of funding just going to the general fund, that then you can take the general fund and kind of grant it, in a way that would maintain the governance more or less that we have now. If you have some dedicated funding, then the question would be, how does that play into, it still being privately operated? And then I do know that, there are some questions about the current governing structure, not just an internal discussion, but what degree does public policy and public, I don't say control, but at least input, needs to be part of the mix too. And my guess is that the mix of funding is going to have to kind of lightly touch upon, not in detail, but some of that as well.
But I would like us to also come back specifically with why we want to keep the Emery go-round.
Well, that's,
Because there may be people here who don't want to. do
Maybe
that,
what
so
you
let's
don't
hear-
need it
let's
to
hear
do,
about
or, I like what you're saying is,
that. Yeah.
why do we think it's good? I mean,
Yeah,
we're all here
yeah, and
comfortable
it's
with it.
everybody here really agreed on that,
We are.
I mean, we honestly
We
don't.
are.
Yeah.
Well, but the it's not, for me, a question of whether it should exist or not, but what it looks like.
Right.
You know, and how it's funded has a dramatic impact on what it looks like.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where
When you
I'm
say
coming
what
from.
it looks like.
The other thing
Well,
that
how
I think,
frequently it runs, who rides it, where it
Oh, yeah,
goes, like,
right, okay.
you know.
Yeah, what
the other
is
thing,
it? Yeah, okay.
we've been talking about
That's a-
increasing the
that's a good
revenue,
point.
but I really think we also need to look at how we can cut costs too. And I, you know, I'm throwing AC Transit out there as an option. Maybe it can work, maybe it can't work. But are there ways that we can be creative and increase service and reduce costs? And I think it's possible.
I certainly, talking to AC Transit, is always worth it. You know, having been a staff person who has talked with AC Transit over the years, particularly around the Emery ground, and I think one of the issues is how slowly AC Transit moves. You know, and you know, and that's really a factor, is that, you know, I mean, it takes years for them to change a route, you know, and then, you know, so I think, one, I think we still need to look.
We have a lot on our table.
Right, and I also think then, the other thing for the next time too, that we really didn't discuss in depth, is that there is the issue of what is to be done between now and the end of, in 2016.
That's right.
And there's an issue right there, right?
Yes.
You know, so I think
That's
that maybe we need to
Right.
kind of, you know, have some
Okay.
sense of that. And I apologize, I was trying to make these charts pretty, and I think I transposed something.
Well, you did a great job, these are good.
Thanks.
We appreciate
Don't worry about
Where's the
that, Karen.
audio from the last meeting located? Is that up yet?
I'm not sure that it is, because we have to have
Another link created or something?
another, yeah, IT has to do something, and if you, I don't know if
Could
you've
you
been
let
aware of
us
some
know
of
when
the
it
challenges
isn't
that IT
available? Because I've had some
Yeah.
residents ask.
It will be up.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I don't know what the agreed upon meeting schedule was, because I wasn't at the
That's
first
the last thing
meeting.
we need to do is
Okay,
when.
Monday at 9 o'clock is horrible for me. Trying to get the kids out the door and, you know, it's a really, really hard time for me. If that's the only time people can meet,
Is
I
a
will
little
make it
later on
happen.
Monday, does that work?
That would help. I mean, like I said, if it's the only time everybody else can meet, I'll make it happen, but it requires a enormous amount of heavy lifting to make that happen.
And
So what time
second
do-
Mondays, the second Mondays, I have at 9, I have the Alameda County Commission on Aging, which I didn't go to this month, but I see that right now, the every other week schedule, it would mean probably skipping a whole series, which I don't think is really appropriate.
Okay, well, when would you,
Later in the day.
I mean, is
Anything
10
else?
easier than 9, or?
Yeah, are you kidding?
Yeah, but it's out at
probably wouldn't work for her though.
Peace Pond Mall. If you change the Monday, if you change it either next Monday or,
Like
Or-
on the odd
or-
Mondays
yeah.
instead of the even Mondays.
it's right now, I checked the next month, and the next month would be the same thing, would be the second Monday.
Would there be a reason not to meet next week? Just gonna talk about.
Why don't we shift the Monday?
Yeah, if you could shift the Monday, it would be
Make
fine
it
with me.
10, let's make it the odd Monday to accommodate Betsy. And I don't think any of us would mind coming in.
I'm a little hesitant to
Oh.
commit to next Monday, but we can try it. I'm just thinking just the
It's right
staff time.
before council.
Yeah, it's,
meeting.
Ah,
That's,
That's right.
Well, that's up to you, but I agree with you, we should shift the Monday and push a little back so
Thank you.
kids can get to school.
let me get back to you probably today on whether it would be next week or it would be in three
The
weeks.
week after.
3 weeks,
Yeah,
yeah.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
Might
Either
need
would be
time
good
to
for
get
me.
materials
That's
together.
my
anyway.
concern, is that by Monday
What
that
is the
needs.
Monday 3 weeks from now? What Monday is that?
That's the 17th.
February 20th, something,
That's- Monday is February the 7th.
17th.
That may be President's.
Washington's birthday.
Oh,
That's
that's-
that week,
Yeah, that's President's weekend.
The 4th.
Thank you for being willing to do it later, though, that
Okay,
will help enormously.
9:30 or 10?
10, please.
Hey, we're okay, why don't we
See
everyone
what
put their
happens.
calendars on the 4th, and after
Monday,
talking to
4th.
Sabrina and a couple other folks that are kind of helping.
Monday, the 4th of
If we
March.
just, no.
The 4th of
February.
February's, it's the
It's the
third.
third.
I'm sorry,
It's the
third.
third, right.
The 4th is the,
Yeah.
council meeting.
I can't,
I'm just a little concerned that that's a little,
Yeah.
not enough time.
And I can't, you know I can't make that.
So how about we do the backup, for the 17th doesn't work. So then that would be the 24th, and that's a lot of.
That's back on the even number
Oh, that's right.
issue for our friend
But
over
that's
there.
not the even number of meetings, or is it?
It's the second Monday of every month.
Yeah, so.
The
yeah.
fourth Monday.
So the fourth Monday.
The fourth
would be
Monday I
okay.
can do it.
So
Like
in
this time I
February,
can
we
do it,
could
it's just
meet
the
the
second
first and
Monday
the
that is
fourth,
not
that would
good.
be all right.
But we would prefer to meet sooner rather than
Yeah.
a whole lot
A
later.
month
Yeah.
from now, yeah.
No, I meant, we
I
could meet,
understand.
yeah, the first, we could meet on the 3rd, and we could meet on the 24th.
We'll see what.
I'm just not sure about the 3rd.
Fair enough.
Why don't we put the 24th in at 10 o'clock?
Okay.
You know, and, because if we meet the 3rd, we probably still have, might even be our last meeting on the 24th. I'm just not, at this point, sure that we can get everything together in time for, you know, to meet a week from now.
Yeah.
We could always just talk.
Well, we want to move it over.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We get it more towards,
As it was ideally,
Absolutely.
getting this,
Was difficult, sure. Well, thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen.
thank you.